This week's PARSHA, PARSHA SHMOS, we begin the second book of Moshe, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. We now enter the book of Shemos, which is Chazal call it the book of Golus v'Geula, the book of exile and redemption. So at the end of Perek Beis, the pasuk says, "Vayara Elokim es Bnei Yisrael, Vayeda Elokim," and God saw the suffering of the Jewish people. Vayeda Elokim, and God knew. What do you mean God knew? God knows everything. So the Beis HaLevi quotes the famous Medrash. The Medrash writes that the Malachim, the angels, were saying, why do you only punish the Egyptians for worshipping Avodah Zarah? The Jews are worshipping Avodah Zarah, also halol of the Avodah Zarah, v'halol of the Avodah Zarah. So why only we punish? The Medrash says because the Jews, I'm testifying by Yed Elokim that the Jews are only doing it because under duress, because of the suffering, the enslavement, or under ordinary conditions they would not. But the Egyptians, they're doing it for Ratzon, and therefore you can't compare someone who doesn't act willingly versus duress. As we know in Halakha in general, something under duress, we don't consider you legally liable for it. So that's what the Beis HaLevi says, Vayed Elokim, on the Medrash, that God knew they're both worshipping idols, but the Egyptians are punished and not the Jews. So in fact, the Beis HaLevi raises a very halacha l'maisa question. We know, we're familiar with Shabbos emergencies. When a person, we know Shabbos is important mitzvah, but human life takes precedence. And therefore, better to machal one Shabbos to be able to keep many more. So you're allowed to call, in fact, they have an obligation to call a doctor on a Shabbos emergency. The question is, all things being equal, which they never are, which doctor do you call? You have two competent doctors, two doctors you're very comfortable with. Do you call the Shomer Shabbos doctor or the non-Shomer Shabbos doctor? So Beis HaLevi says, based on this Medrash, we see that you call the Shomer Shabbos doctor, because the definition of onus, the definition of under duress, is the only reason I'm doing it is because of this circumstance, this duress. If not for the onus, in this case the emergency, if not for the emergency, I never would machal Shabbos. But someone who always is machal Shabbos anyway, so even in a case where emergency comes up, nevertheless he's still not labeled an onus, and therefore better to call the Shomer Shabbos doctor. So we see Rabbi Aaron Selevan in a different scenario. He discusses a similar question. What happens if someone is walking down the block, he goes to McDonald's every day, he has his lunch special, his Big Mac, and one day on his way over, he's about to enter McDonald's, someone comes over to him, puts a gun to his head and says, "What? I know you're Jewish, I know you can't eat, you have to eat kosher, I want you to go into McDonald's and eat lunch." So he goes into McDonald's, he tells them the usual, the lunch special, and he eats the sandwich. So is that person an onus or a ratzon? So that's what Rabbi Aaron raises. What happens in a scenario where you're onus and ratzon bahadi hadadi? You're under duress, you're doing it willingly at the same time. So Rabbi Aaron says, like the Beis HaLevi, you're labeled a ratzon, not an onus, and you're not totally exempt from the scenario. You're not labeled an onus. And similarly, we find this a haflah. In Ksubis, the Gemara tells us, again, the details of halacha aren't important for us right now, but the halacha is, if you're married 10 years, you can't have kids, you haven't fulfilled pru revu, a boy and a girl, so then you have to marry another wife in order to fulfill your mitzvah of pru revu, because after 10 years, it means you're not going to be able to have kids. So However, the Havla points out, but that's only true if the Gemara says you're like Avram Avinu, you're living in Eretz Yisrael. Then we could say it's you and your wife. But if you're living in Chutz La'aretz and not having kids, it's the sin of living in Chutz La'aretz that's causing you not to have children, and therefore you don't have to divorce your wife, you don't have to marry a new wife. So the Afua asks, but we know Tosfos tells us in Ksuvis that Bizman Hazeh, during his day, there's no longer a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. Because of the Sakanas Drachim, traveling there or being there, the difficulty of keeping Truma Ma'aser. You know, whether that applies today or not, many Achronim say it no longer does. But Tosfos writes that during his time there was no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. So Rafua asked, and if that's the case, then so therefore it should make a difference. Even if you live in Chutz La'aretz, you should have to marry another woman, because if there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, then you can't say there's an avera to live in Chutz La'aretz. And therefore you have to say you can't blame Chutz La'aretz, it means it's you and your wife. So our answer is no, it doesn't make a difference. Because even if there was a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, no one would go anyway. So therefore, your onus and Ratzon Bahadi Hadadi, and therefore we still, even though there is no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, we still can, since you wouldn't go anyway, when you live in Chutz La'aretz, we still consider it the sin of living in Chutz La'aretz, and therefore that's why you can't have children and you don't have to marry another woman. And there's a similar idea in the Rinas Yitzchak, a Sefer Navi, and Chumash I believe as well. He brings down, I think at the end of the Parshas Vayechi, it says Yosef lived to 110. And we learned from Chazal he should have lived to 120. So why did he lose his 10 years? So it says when he was discussing with the brothers, when the brothers said, Avdecha Yaakov, my servant Yaakov, he didn't make a macha, he didn't say anything. So in punishment for not saying anything when they were denigrating his father, so he lost his 10 years. However, the Rinas Yitzchak points out, if you look in the Chumash, it only says it's 5 times. Right, so 5 times it says Avdecha Yaakov. So where do we get 10 from? 10 from is because they needed a translator. They didn't know he was Jewish and knew Hebrew. So therefore he had to say it once in the translation, the Egyptian, and once in the Hebrew. So he said it in his language and then someone translated. Alright, so then it should only be 5 years off his life. He couldn't go ahead and tell them, he couldn't say it over, he couldn't protest in Hebrew, else they'll know who reveal himself. So again, the Rinas Yitzchak says the same thing, yeah, but even if he could have, he wanted from the fact he didn't stop them the first time. So again, so we see this concept, if you're honest and Ratzon Bahadi Adadi, you're not labeled an honest and you're responsible. That's the Beis HaLevi. He says, better to call a Shomer Shabbos doctor, because someone who's isn't a Shomer Shabbos, and even when he's doing it in this case, he's still not labeled an honest. The Sitz Eliezer Waldberg quotes the Beis HaLevi, but it's unclear if he's quoting him as a Pella, as a tremendous Chiddush, or he's quoting him to say that he agrees. So he writes, he actually concludes, he actually agrees with the conclusion of and this, actually one other thing before I get to the Sitz Eliezer, that's the fact we're in PARSHA Shemos, so the Jews coming down to Mitzrayim. So why were the Egyptians punished is the famous question. If it was already decided, Parshas Lech Lecha, Kadosh Baruch Hu said you're going to go down to a foreign land, so why were the Egyptians punished? So some point out because it didn't have to be them. It did say in the pasuk the Egyptians have to do it, so they decided on their own to do it. So the Ramban, yeah, so what? If it doesn't say the Egyptians. But if we know that's Ratzon Hashem, if there's a mitzvah to do it, so who cares? You want to be the one doing the mitzvah. So that's not a tiny. So if that's the case, then so why were the Egyptians punished? Because they overdid it. They did a lot much more they treated the Jews much worse than it said. And therefore, so then not only were they punished on the extra, but they were punished on the original, because it shows they weren't doing it because God said the Jews are going to be enslaved or in a foreign land. They did it, they were Megala by doing the extra. It shows even the main thing they were doing because they were anti-Semites and not because they were fulfilling the will of God. So either way, so we see the concept of Ratzon and Onis Ba'adei Adadi, you're not labeled honest. The Sitz Eliezer agrees with the Beis Halevi. He says you call a Shomer Shabbos factor, but for a different reason. Because the collateral damage. So let's say you get there, Jewish mother, you call in, it's just a virus, don't worry about it, it's not an emergency. So they point out that so then if you're a Shomer Shabbos doctor, you know what you can do, what you can't do. Well, how do you find out it's not an emergency? Turning on lights or writing prescriptions. So therefore, better to call the Shomer Shabbos doctor because he knows exactly what to do or what not to do. So that's the conclusion of the Sitz Eliezer and the Beis Halevi, albeit for two different reasons that they conclude. However, when I first thought of the Shaila, I actually thought that you should call the non-Shomer Shabbos doctor. And I found out I have Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky on my side, as well as Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Because actually it's a similar machlokas, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, on, let's say, a resident in school, medical school, and the different residencies. And sometimes you get the Shabbos, sometimes you don't. So the question was, could you switch residencies? Could a Shomer Shabbos give to a non-Shomer Shabbos the Shabbos, and since he's not keeping Shabbos anyway, you're allowed to do that. Rav Shlomo Zalman says no. Rav Moshe Feinstein says yes. That'll be a similar shayla also on the Temple Mount, when you have different people doing Shomer duty, and let's say different people don't want to go up to a certain part on the Temple Mount, so could you give it to another Jew who doesn't care? That, so perhaps that could be the same issue as well. But either way, so what does Rabbi Yaakov say and others is that we know Shabbos is 24, 25 hours. So if a person could be Machal Shabbos for some of the time. But we know when you're involved in a Shabbos emergency, so you're not considered desecrating Shabbos. So the person who's keeping the Shomer Shabbos doctor, he's already doing mitzvahs. He's davening, he's eating his cholent, he's sleeping, so he's involved in mitzvahs. Why bother him? But a non-Shomer Shabbos doctor who's involved in other things, so at least for 1 hour, 2 hours, 6 hours of Shabbos, calls man, he's involved in an emergency, so therefore he wouldn't be a Machal Shabbos. That's why, and hence Rav Moshe concludes of Yaakov, it's better to call a non-Shomer Shabbos doctor than a non-Shomer. So that's a machlokas. The Beis Halevi says a Shomer Shabbos doctor, Sitz Eliezer a Shomer Shabbos doctor, and Rav Shlomo Zalman will probably say a Shomer Shabbos doctor, and Rav Moshe Feinstein and Rav Yaakov seem to go with the non-Shomer Shabbos doctor. But that's the pshat on the pasuk. God do. What did God know? God knows everything. Though you realize that the Medrash says that the Jews, why were the Jews not punished for idol worship that the Egyptians were? Because the Egyptians did it willingly, while the Jews did it under duress. And that's what the Beis Halevi learns out. This is so that someone who the only time you label it honest is if the only reason you do this act is because of the situation. If you do it anyway, you are necessarily labeled an honest. So that's the pshat in the pasuk. Vayedel Kim, and God knew.